Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. This is a topic that has been on my mind for some time, and I would like to share it with you. Something which I had researched on, I've been thinking about for quite some time. This is about why Gotama resorted to jhāna for Buddhahood. And this is an analysis according to the suttas, the Pali suttas. Let's start off with a story in brief. We are going to look at his renunciation and then his attainment of the third and fourth āruppas under his first two teachers. Then going on self-modification, and finally attaining Buddhahood. There are actually three accounts of how he attained Buddhahood. I think we are most familiar with this one. He developed the four jhānas leading to the threefold true knowledge. And you may not be so familiar about this one, which is his reflection on the law of the dependent origination leading to the discovery of the Noble Eightfold Path. I think most of us would think that he reflected on the law of dependent origination only after he got enlightened. But actually, no. It was prior to his enlightenment. And also, a third aspect is his reflection on the gratification, the danger, and escape in the case of the five aggregates. This is even lesser known by people. So after we go through all this, then I'm going to come out with a sutta-based conclusion on why Gotama resorted to jhāna for Buddhahood. So now let's go into the details. Let's look at his renunciation. This may be, I think, quite unfamiliar to most of you, but this is what the Buddha actually said. So here you can see, he actually reflected on this. Now, I too am subject to old age and am not exempt from old age. Such being the case, if I were to feel repelled, humiliated, and disgusted when seeing another who is old, that would not be proper for me. When I reflected thus, my intoxication with youth was completely abandoned. And he reflected in a similar way for health as well as for life. Then later, he considered, why, being myself subject to birth, do I seek what is also subject to birth? Why, being myself subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement, do I seek what is also subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement? Suppose that, being myself subject to birth, having understood the danger in what is subject to birth, I seek the unborn supreme security from bondage, nibbana. You see that these are all coming from different suttas, and we have to compile all of them to get the whole picture. So at a later time, he actually shaved off his hair while his parents were grieving with tears on their faces. I don't think you've heard this, right? What you have heard is this, right? He saw the four signs. He took his chariot out. In different days, he saw different sights. He saw aging, he saw sickness, he saw death, and finally he saw a renunciant. Correct? That's what you heard. And this is actually an account from Mahabodhana Sutta. It is the account of Vipassi before he became a Buddha, when he was still a young prince, that was what happened to him. He went with the charioteer, he went around seeing these 4 sights. But that didn't happen to Gotama. Gotama didn't go to see anything. He just reflected by himself. And then this is also what you would be familiar with. And then after he had seen the renunciation, and then he went back home, and then he felt that he had an urge to renounce, and then he went out with his charioteer, and then he cut off his hair and asked the charioteer to go back home. Right? This is also from Mahabodhana Sutta. This was the account that was given of Prince Vipassi before he became a Buddha. So you see, copy and paste. It is not actually what happened. What happened was that he actually renounced in the presence of his parents, who were not willing to let him renounce, and they were weeping. And then you might have heard his story also. He felt very disgusted when he saw his female companions on the ground sleeping. That was because they were entertaining him. And then when they saw that he fell asleep, they also took a rest and they fell asleep. But when he got up, he saw that he felt very disgusted by the various postures. And that also spurred him to renounce. And this one came from the account of Yasa in the Vinaya Mahāvagga. Yasa was the first lay stream enterer. And that was the account of what happened to him, but not to Gotama. And also, you would have seen this, that he had a last look at his wife, right? With his newborn babe suckling, a last peep before he left home. This cannot be found anywhere. This is a Buddhahood's preamble to the Jataka commentary. These are all found in Buddhahood's preamble to the Jataka commentary. He pieced up everything together. Yeah? And this is not actually what the Buddha said. The Buddha actually didn't see all these 4 sides. He just reflected on his own, and then he renounced in the presence of his parents who were weeping. And also this story about cutting his hair and then sending the charioteer back. That was what happened to Prince Vipassi. He saw the first sight the first day, second sight the second day, third sight the third day, and then last sight on the 4th day, he saw this renunciant. And he went down to interview him. How come you are not dressed like normal people? Why are you dressed like that? And what are you doing? And he told him what a renunciant is supposed to do. He went to Prince Vipassi before he became a Shama Sambuddha. But this never happened to Gotama. So if you want to know the true life story of the Buddha, then you should look up this one. It's called The Life of the Buddha according to the Pali Canon. If you have a Gmail account, you can go here and read it for free in Google Books. However, if you want to buy it, you can also buy from Buddhist Publication Society. They have a paperback edition. Or if you want to download a PDF file, this can be found from this website. It's called Reading Faithfully. This is a pariyatti.org website. It's a very good website. If you're into sutta studies, I recommend you visit this website to get very good translations, which are freely available. Okay, so let's look at what happened to him after that. So after he renounced, to cut a long story short, he looked for someone to teach him. And his first 2 teachers were Alara Kalama and Udaga Ramaputta. Alara Kalama taught him the 3rd āruppa, which is the formless attainments. The 3rd formless attainments. There are altogether 4 of them. He taught him the 3rd. And soon he mastered it. And Alara Kalama was so happy. He was such a great being, really. He didn't feel jealous. He was so happy that Gotama was such a good learner and so talented to be able to achieve what he had achieved within such a short time. And immediately he asked him to take over half of his students. But Gotama thought, this is not what I was looking for. So he went on to look for his second teacher, that was Uddaka Ramaputta. Uddaka Ramaputta taught the fourth āruppa, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. He had not attained that, but his teacher had. His name is Uddaka Ramaputta. Ramaputta could mean the son of Rama, or it could mean a disciple who is like a son of Rama. Rama was his teacher. His teacher had already passed away, and his teacher taught the fourth āruppa. He himself had not attained it, but he taught it anyway. And so when Gotama went to learn from him, he also attained to the fourth āruppa, something which his teacher had not attained. And his teacher also was a great being. He didn't feel jealous. But in fact, he was so happy, he asked him to take over all his students. Very rare to get such great beings, right? Usually the teacher will be very jealous, afraid that you have more influence than him. But no, he was a great being. Anyway, Gotama said, this is not what I was looking for. This does not bring me to the end of suffering, to Nibbana. So he left them, and before we continue the story, so what exactly are the āruppas? You might want to know. So here, this is an extract from one sutta. This is from Mahavedala Sutta, MN 43. This is a conversation between Āyasmā Sariputta and Āyasmā Aggacitta, two of the most intelligent disciples of the Buddha, who were famed for their analytical knowledge of being able to analyze the Buddha's teachings and preach what the Buddha had told them briefly in detail. One was asking the other, friend, what can be known by purified mind consciousness released from the five faculties? The answer, friend, by purified mind consciousness released from the five faculties, the base of infinite space can be known thus. Space is infinite. And then he goes on to repeat that for the others. The base of infinite consciousness can be known thus. Consciousness is infinite. And the base of nothingness can be known thus. There is nothing. But it's interesting that he stopped at the third āruppa and he did not continue to the fourth one. Because the fourth one is the base of neither perception nor non-perception. It's like you are neither here nor there, you are not really very conscious. So that's why he didn't say it's purified mind consciousness. So what are the five faculties? The five faculties are not the five spiritual faculties. The five faculties are the five senses. So released from the five senses, gone beyond the five senses. When the mind has gone beyond the five senses, what can it be conscious of? Then we go on to the next one. The I itself, as well as those forms, will actually be present. And yet, one will not experience that base. The ear itself, as well as those sounds, will actually be present. And yet, one will not experience that base. And the same is repeated for the other senses. So all the senses are there. They are in good working order. The objects of the senses are there. But the mind is not conscious. It's just like when you are asleep at night. When you're asleep at night, your five senses have not shut down, They are still working. But you are totally oblivious of them. So the question was, but friend, if he was not percipient of what was happening of the five senses, then what is he percipient of? And the answer is, with the complete surmounting of perceptions of forms, with the passing away of perceptions of sensory impingement, with non-attention to perceptions of diversity, perceiving space is infinite, a bhikkhu enters and dwells in the base of the infinity of space. When one is thus percipient, one does not experience that base. That base means the five senses. The five sense experiences. So let's look at this in detail, and there's breakdown, there's description. What is meant by complete surmounting of perceptions of forms? Forms here could mean not just what you can see with your eyes, it could mean all the five senses, all the objects of the five senses, because they are all material form. What you see, hear, smell, taste, or feel with the body. So that means to say, with the complete surmounting of perceptions of forms, he is not aware of what's happening with the senses. Well, it's another way of putting what was said earlier. With the passing away of perceptions of sensory impingement, again, this is a repetition. Sensory impingements means what is impinged at your five senses. So there's no more perceptions of what is impinging on the five senses, what the five senses are perceiving. With non-attention to perceptions of diversity. Okay, so now he's no longer perceiving what's happening at the five senses. But the mind is still there. And he can still perceive things going on in the mind. There could be thoughts, there could be visions, there could be images, whatever. But he's not paying attention to anything else except one thing. With non-attention to perceptions of diversity in the mind, he perceives only one single thing, which is space is infinite. And therefore, when he is percipient of that one thing, he is no longer percipient of anything else, either in the mind or at the five senses. This is from Ananda Sutta. So, from these two extracts, we see that the āruppas are absorptions in a single object of focus, wherein all the five senses are completely cut off. That is what is true absorption. You see, in the earlier citation, when there was this question about the five senses are still intact, the objects of the five senses are still there, but one is not perceiving them. So what could one be perceiving? So instead of saying that it's a jhānas, no, he said it's the āruppas. So what does that mean? It means that apart from the āruppas, if you are in the jhānas, you can still perceive the five senses. Right? Logical, by implication, because the jhānas are not mentioned in there. Only the three of the four āruppas. And then he found out that that wasn't what he wanted. That also couldn't lead to nibbana, because you're just absorbed in your own world of thinking of one single thing. You are not aware of what's happening outside you. So how can that lead to the end of suffering? So he thought, well, this is not the way. So he went out and tried his own. He tried self-mortification in various ways. He mortified himself by sitting right under the sun during the hot weather, during the hot season. And then he will stay in the open at night during the cold season, exposing himself to extremes of temperature. And finally, the last thing he did was he fasted until he was so weak that he fainted. That brought him to his senses. He recalled that when his father was occupied, he was sitting under the cool shade of a rose apple tree, and at that time, he had spontaneously attained the first jhāna. First jhāna here is described here as secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. I entered upon and abided in the first jhāna, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. And then he asked, could that be the path to enlightenment? Then, following on that memory, came the realization. That is indeed the path to enlightenment. Now, the question is, what was he meditating on to get to the first jhāna? Because it's not stated in this sutta. So again, we have to do some searching, and then we have to piece the jigsaw together. And we found that in one sutta, in the Ānapana Samyutta, he was encouraging the monks to practice Anapanasati. And he said that he too, before he became fully enlightened, he was actually practicing Anapana. And practicing Anapanasati led him to be liberated from the taints. So now we know. So he was doing Anapanasati at that time. He got the first jhana when he was sitting under the rose apple tree. Another observation that we can make is that when Gotama went to study or learn the āruppas from his first two teachers, they never taught him the jhānas. Because if they had, why would he recall his childhood experience? Right? They went straight to the āruppas. So you can actually go straight to the āruppas without having to go through the jhānas. Although in the Visuddhimagga, you're supposed to go through the jhānas first, finish all the 4 jhānas, and then only after that you go on to the āruppas. But in this Padipopama Sutta, in the Samyutta Nikaya, the discourses connected with mindfulness of breathing in and breathing out. He encouraged the monks to practice mindfulness of breathing. And he said that this could lead to the first jhana, the second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana, the first āruppa, the second āruppa, third āruppa, fourth āruppa, and also to Nirodha Samapatti, the cessation of feeling and perception. So what is the difference between the jhanas and the āruppas? The āruppas are also called ayatana. The Buddha never talked about 8 jhanas, although the commentaries tell us there are 8 jhanas. The Buddha only talked about 4 jhanas and 4 ayatanas. The ayatanas are the āruppas. Ayatana means base, the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, and the base of neither perception nor non-perception. In the Pali Canon, we also have this word āruppa, meaning the formless. Let's look at the difference between the jhana and the āruppa. Here in Mahavedala Sutta, in this conversation between Āyasmā Sariputta and Āyasmā Aggacitta, the question was asked, what are the 5 things that the first jhana has abandoned? And what are the 5 things that the first jhana possesses? So it says that the first jhana has abandoned the 5 hindrances and it possesses 5 factors. I think you are already familiar with the 5 hindrances, right? Which are sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse, and finally, doubt. Okay, we will look at the 5 factors later. And the jhanas are defined by the jhana factors, not the objects of focus. Throughout the suttas, we can see very vivid, very detailed descriptions of the jhanas. But the Buddha never stated what was the object of meditation. Only the jhana factors were stated and the experience of jhana, but not the object. Therefore, the jhanas can take any object, whether it's an object of the mind or the objects of the 5 senses. In fact, there's one sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya called the Sanketa Sutta, AN 8.63, where the Buddha asked the monks to develop the 4 Brahma Viharas and the 4 Satipatthanas at different levels of samadhi, which includes the jhana factors. Although the word jhana was not used, the jhana factors are there, they are mentioned, and he says that one can develop the 4 Brahma Viharas and the 4 Satipatthanas at different levels of samadhi. The āruppas, on the other hand, are not defined by the jhana factors, but they are defined by the objects of focus. So the first āruppa is defined by its object of focus, which is infinite space. The second āruppa is defined by its object of focus, which is infinite consciousness. The third, nothingness. And the fourth, neither perception nor non-perception. Why? Because the mental factors in the āruppas are almost all the same as those in the fourth jhana. And we can see this in Anupada Sutta, in Majjhima Nikaya 111. First, we have this one, which is the 5 factors. So the mental factors of the first jhana are Vitakka, Vichara, Piti, Sukha, and Citte, Kagata, which are thought, examination, rapture, pleasure, unification of mind. Just now we talked about the 5 things that the first jhana has abandoned, the 5 hindrances, and the 5 things that he has acquired. And these are the 5 things. Now we look at the fourth jhana. All the factors in the fourth jhana are similar to the āruppas. All of them are the same. So you cannot define an āruppa by the mental factors. Yeah, you have defined an āruppa by the object of its focus. So that's the difference between the āruppas and the jhanas. So coming back to the story, after his self-mortification, he found that this was futile. This self-mortification also could not lead him to what he wanted. And then when he recalled his childhood memory that he had spontaneously attained the first jhana, he came to the realization that this was the path that would lead him to what he wanted. And so then what he did was he started to nourish himself to get more strength in order to practice the jhanas. And when he had more strength, then he developed the 4 jhanas. And this led to the recollection of past lives. And then to the divine eye, seeing beings passing away and reappearing according to their actions. So this is where cause and effect comes in, the law of karma. And finally, he attained the destruction of the influence due to the realization of the 4 Noble Truths. This is found in Mahasacchaka Sutta. The influence here are sometimes translated as the taints, sometimes as the inflows. These are the things that flow into the mind. The Pali word is āsava. Āsavati means to flow in. So that's why there's one sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya where the Buddha says the mind is luminous and it is defiled by visiting defilements. So that's why it's called inflows, because they flow into the mind to pollute the mind. So this is one version that he developed the 4 jhanas using Anapana, and then after that he recollected the past lives, and then he had the divine eye, and then finally he realized the 4 Noble Truths. Another interesting thing is that he had already attained the āruppas prior to his development of the jhanas. Why didn't he use the āruppas to do all these things? To recollect past lives or to the divine eye? Why? The second version is that he reflected on the law of dependent origination when he was still a bodhisattva, not after he became a Buddha. When he was still a bodhisattva, he reflected on this. While he was reflecting on this, towards the end, with the cessation of birth, then everything else will cease. At that time, the word nirodha, the word cessation, make an impact on him, and he said, now I found the way. This is the way. So he said, this is the Noble Eightfold Path. And then he followed the Noble Eightfold Path. And finally, he achieved the destruction of the influence due to the realization of the 4 Noble Truths. So you could say that his recollection of past lives and his attainment of the divine eye, being able to see how beings pass away and are reborn due to their previous actions, this is also another way of saying this is conditionality. Yeah, but this Paticca Samuppada, the law of dependent origination, is something more detailed. And this can be found in Nagara Sutta, SN 12.65. Now let's compare this with Vipassi Bodhisatta. Vipassi Buddha was the first among the 7 Buddhas that the Buddha talked about in the early suttas. In the early Nikaya, there are only 7 Buddhas. It is only in the later part, in Buddha Vangsa and Charya Pitaka, that you have all these 28 Buddhas coming into the picture. And beyond that, you have thousands beyond the canon. So there was this story of Vipassana Bodhisattva found in the Mahapadana Sutta. And he also reflected on the law of dependent origination. But by merely reflecting on it, did not get him enlightened. After that, on another occasion, he repeatedly observed how the 5 aggregates arise and fall. So in the same way, in an earlier citation, we saw that Gotama also reflected on the law of dependent origination. And then towards the end of his reflection, he realized that, the succession of birth will lead to the succession of everything else. And then he says, this is the path, this is the Noble Eightfold Path I discovered. I rediscovered. And then he followed it. So he actually followed the Noble Eightfold Path. He didn't get enlightened just by reflecting on the law of dependent origination. So in the same way, Vipassana also didn't get enlightened just by reflecting on the law of dependent origination. He had reflected on it, and that was already in the background, at the back of his mind. And then as he was watching how the 5 aggregates arise and pass away, then he saw the link, cause, condition, effect. Cause, condition, effect. He saw the link, and that's how he had a complete liberation of his mind from the influence. Right? So, same way. Gotama followed the Noble Eightfold Path, and Vipassana Bodhisattva had to repeatedly observe the 5 aggregates. Not just arising and passing away, but how to see the cause and condition. Why they arise, why they pass away. And then, the third version of how he got enlightened is, he reflected on the gratification, danger, and escape in case of the 5 aggregates. And that led to directly knowing all this as it really is. What does that mean? What is the gratification in case of the 5 aggregates? The gratification is the pleasure that arises by getting what the 5 aggregates want. Whether it's a pleasure in the forms that one perceives through the 5 senses, or whether it's through the pleasure of feeling itself, or the pleasure of a memory, sanya, or the pleasure of sankhara, of thinking. There are some intellectuals, they love thinking. That's why they cannot meditate. Because meditating to them is very boring. Correct? You have to just focus on one single object, breathing in, breathing out. So boring, you'll fall asleep. So the mind will ultimately go down, start thinking. Right? Get intellectual stimulation. During my retreats, I will tell people, okay, observe noble silence, don't talk. Surrender your phones, cannot see phone. Don't read free distribution Dhamma books. And then what do? Cannot talk, cannot see phone, cannot read Dhamma books. They do go around looking at posters. Just to get intellectual stimulation. Right? When I ask you to watch the 5 senses, rotating to the 5 senses, watching the 5 senses, although sometimes they get so bored and they start to think. Yeah. So that is the gratification, the pleasure of thinking, just for the sake of thinking. If you watch your mind, you will know the mind is really so busybody. Whenever any of the 5 senses comes into contact with any object, it will start to comment, start to judge, start to make all sorts of stories in the mind. So he saw that directly knowing all this as it really is not just understanding it intellectually, but actually observing. Actually, this is what is happening to the mind all the time. And then the danger is that all these pleasures are transient, they come and go. Yeah, you have a wonderful memory of good times that you had. You think about it, yeah, how long can you get pleasure out of that memory? It will come and it will go. Whatever food you eat also, how long do you taste it? If you really eat mindfully, you'll know how boring eating is. But because we don't eat mindfully, well, we are munching, we are talking, we are thinking, and then we think it's nice. But actually, the actual moments of enjoying is very few when you really watch your mind. Most of the time, you're busy chewing, or munching away. The food that looks so delicious and so crispy has now become mulch in your mouth. If you spit it out, do you think you can eat it? But to you, it's tasty, it's nice. But when you look at it, yeah. So he directly knew all this as it is, through experience, not just through intellection. The danger is, of course, it is transient, or drawbacks. It's transient, and also you go through so much suffering to get what you are craving for. And finally, how much pleasure do you derive for how long? Finish, and then you go on to the next round. Something else, something new to go after. And then you start the whole cycle of suffering again. So what is the escape? The escape is, don't entertain the desire. Don't follow the desire. Once you catch it, stop it, nip it at the bud. Don't follow it. You want this, you want that, you yearn for this, you go after this. Once you catch a desire, stop it. That is actual escape from it. The discipline of desire. And so he says that only when he had thoroughly known all these things, the gratification, the danger, and escape, in case of the 5 aggregates, did he become awakened to the surpassed perfect enlightenment. This is another version. So there are actually 3 aspects of how the Buddha got enlightened. So now we come to a sutta-based conclusion. Why Gotama resorted to jhāna for Buddhahood? Since Alara Kalama and Uddaka Brahmaputta, he had attained such high levels of concentration, why does he need to fall back on the jhānas? Yeah, because the 4th jhāna is equivalent to the āruppas in terms of the mental factors. Whereas the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, they are actually below. They are inferior in concentration. Why? Well, though the āruppas are very deep levels of samadhi, they are merely absorptions, totally separated from the 5 senses. You look at the Buddha's path, he was looking at beings arising and passing away, dying and getting rebirth due to their past actions. He was contemplating the law of dependent origination. He was looking at the gratification, danger, and escape in case of the 5 aggregates. All these, you can't do that when you are in the āruppas, can you? When you are locked in your own world of nothingness, what do you see? You see nothing. Literally, you see nothing. So that's why, although awakening requires samadhi, but it requires a samadhi in which one is still conscious of what's going on in the senses. Why? In order to be able to discern conditionality expressed in the Four Noble Truths and the law of dependent origination. And that's why the jhana that he attained through anapanasati was just ideal for this. Because the jhana through anapanasati is something which is not an absorption, not like many people think. Jhanas are not absorptions. Absorptions happen only in the āruppas. Now let's look at the 4 tetrads of Anapanasati Sutta. 16 steps altogether, so-called steps, but not necessarily in a sequential way. You have the first 4, you're aware of a long breath, aware of a short breath, experiencing the whole body, tranquilizing kaya sankhara, or tranquilizing the breath. That's under Kayanupassana. And then Vedananupasana, you're experiencing rapture, experiencing happiness, experiencing citta sankhara, which is feeling and perception. And then you're also tranquilizing the feeling and the perception. So you can't do all these things with just the āruppas, because āruppas, you are totally absorbed in one single object and you don't know what's happening. So, but here, the Buddha is aware of so many things, right? So while you are doing the jhanas, you can also go straight to the last one, repeatedly observing impermanence. While your breath is impermanent, comes and goes. Your thoughts also come and go, right? Even though your thoughts have not completely gone yet, You have not attained to the fourth jhana. On the way there, you can go straight to practice Dhammanupassana, to see what's happening. Right? Now, there's this interpretation of Anapanasati Sutta, or the practice of mindfulness of breathing, that is actually very contrary to the suttas. They say that when you do Anapana, watch your breath, and then there is a nimitta, a visual image that arises. Then you stop watching the breath, you focus on that image, and then you try to become skillful in the image. You try to manipulate it, try to make it big, small, and so forth until you're skilled in it, and then you get absorbed in it. That is precisely what the Buddha went away from. Right? He saw that absorption was not the way to get to Nibbana. So that's why if you look at the four tetras, it is not absorption. Yeah? You are still aware of what's happening to the senses, aware of what's happening to the five aggregates. So that nimitta is not anapanasati. It is anapanasimitta sati meditation. Not anapanasati meditation. It is a meditation on the nimitta that arises out of anapana. Because here, from the beginning until the end, the Buddha says that you're still aware of breathing. You're breathing in, breathing out, then you train your mind to repeatedly observe impermanence. You breathe in and breathe out, then you train your mind to experience the citta, and so forth. Okay, so this is my conclusion, why Uttama resorted to jhāna for Buddhahood. And so now it's question time.
Venerable has given a thesis linking all the suttas of Gotama until he becomes a Buddha. So now we can see reason why he did certain things and why he doesn't. Earlier, we just didn't bother about it, especially your treatment about the āruppas, then the dependent origination, and then the Four Noble Truths and the Eight Noble Path. My question is, it looks very complicated. It has to cover a very wide field to be enlightened. And yet, we also know in the suttas about certain yogis, even like Angulimala, listening to it, he became enlightened.
No, he didn't. That's also another misconception. He did not get enlightened when he listened to the Buddha.
But in spite of all his defilement, he still managed in his lifetime.
He had to go back to meditate to get there.
But then the sutta mentioned that in some of the sermon, the 500 of them listening, and then they became. So it seems that there are ways that you can reach it without having to go through such a complicated path, like the Eight Noble Path. The other question I had in mind is in the Satipatthana, it mentioned about the direct way, the only way.
Direct, not only.
Direct only.
Yes.
It's only the direct way.
It's not the only, there's no only there. It's the direct way.
It's a direct way. So the Venerable has mentioned about 3 methods of Buddhahood.
Three versions. Actually, he attained Buddhahood once only. But these are described from 3 different angles.
3 different angles. It appears that the third one, where you see your aggregates, the rise and fall, and see things as they are, it seems to be very short as compared to the other 2 that you have to have dependent origination and the Eight Noble Path. You must know all that before you reach it. I would like Venerable to give some ideas about it. Sadhu.
Yeah, of course it is. As far as I know, all the lay people during the Buddha's time didn't attend retreats to get enlightened. All they did was listen to the Buddha give a Dhamma talk and they got enlightened there. One talk only. How many have you listened to? How many books have you read? How many retreats have you done? But it's different, circumstances are different. Beethoven was able to compose a symphony at the age of 12. Symphony, You still playing your piano keys, Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Why? Because you did the homework in the past. It was something that was done in the past and it brought forward. So, child prodigies are not just miracles. It was because of something that brought forward from what they had done in the past. Right? So we don't really know what we did in the past. So we keep on trying whatever works for us. And the Buddha also gave so many different ways of getting enlightened, because the Buddha knew what a person needed. And he would tailor his discourse to suit the needs of the person. But he's no longer around now. Right? So that's why we have to do a lot of window shopping. Okay, anyone else?
Bhante, how does one practice seeing the arising, passing away of the five aggregates during meditation?
You have to attend the retreat to do that. Usually I will tell people, only when you get to the stage of thought-free meditation, then only you see the five aggregates in the ultimate sense. Otherwise, you are just looking at activities of the five aggregates, thinking, dreaming, commenting. These are activities of the five aggregates. These are not the five aggregates in the ultimate sense. When you have gone beyond thought, at that time, there's only the five aggregates left. And that's when people don't know what to do, because they are not used to doing that. So when you get there, then you need to know what the five aggregates are in order to be able to identify them. All right? Yeah. And also you need to have some background knowledge, right view of cause and effect. Okay, next please.
Bhante, so the āruppas, they are not samma samadhi, but the four jhānas are samma samadhi, since the āruppas do not lead to nibbana. So it's not...
Yeah, in fact, in the definition of samma samadhi, āruppa is not there. Only the four jhānas. And one placement of mind supported by the seven factors of the Noble Eightfold Path.
So it's not really necessary to practice the āruppas.
Of course it's not. There's all those lay people who got enlightened during the Buddha's time. They just listen to the Dhamma talk. Which āruppa did they get? Okay? Okay, anyone else?
How do you link open awareness to anapanasati and jhāna to obtain the liberation?
As I said, jhāna is defined by the jhāna factors, not by the object. So it could be objects of the five senses, it could be just your breath, which is also one of the five senses, right? And so, as long as you are able to get to a stage where the jhāna factors are there, you have abandoned the five hindrances, and then you have initial thought and sustained thought, then you have rapture, comfort or happiness, and one placement of mind, then it's really the first jhāna. Right? And also, in order to become enlightened, at that moment, one has to have at least the first jhāna, whether it's a Srimantra or an Arahant. Okay?
Thank you.
Anyone else?
May I ask the path to enlightenment? There are many paths. Some in the sutta it says we develop samatha, then vipassana, or vipassana first, then samatha. So I like to ask, if reflecting on the gratification danger as well as reflecting on dependent origination, is these two, does this comprise of vipassana section of it? Is it vipassana? Because once we have developed samatha, then we move on to vipassana. Are these two what we call as vipassana development?
Yeah, you could say so. Yes.
Okay.
You see, there are actually four ways, right? Samatha first, followed by vipassana. Vipassana first, followed by samatha, and both at the same time. And finally, none of the above. This one sounds more like vipassana.
Vipassana means to look at sankhara, how it arises.
Yeah. Vipassana is essentially looking at sankhara in a certain way, to see them in terms of anicca, dukkha, anatta. And also, sankhara by definition are conditioned phenomena, constructions, right? So
Yes.
they are already causes and conditions for sankharas to arise.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bhante, for the very inspiring talk. There seems to be so much misconception, and actually it's the first time I'm hearing all this misconception. Will there be some correction so that we will not go on believing all this so-called misconception?
This is one attempt. Up to you to propagate to others. I think every Sunday school teacher should get hold of the book, The Life of the Buddha according to the Pali canon.
But somehow the Jakarta tales are very attractive for children. So from childhood, we already have this misconception.
Yeah, what to do? That's why we have to change, restart. Restart.
So that means we have to rewrite the Sunday school
Right,
syllabus.
exactly. Yes. Theravada Buddhist Council of Malaysia is supposed to do that. They promise, I hope they come out with it.
Thank you, Bhante.
In Sankita Sutta, it's mentioned the different levels of samadhi. What are the different levels of samadhi, Bhante?
They are not listed according to the jhānas. But it says you should develop the samadhi with vitakka, with initial thought. That's one type of samadhi. Then you develop another type of samadhi with vitakka and vichara. All right. And then you develop another sort of samadhi with vichara only, without vitakka. And then you develop another type of samadhi without vitakka, without vichara. You develop another sort of samadhi with rapture. Develop another sort of samadhi with happiness, and so forth. So it's listed in that way.
Some teachers teach that jhanas are a state of absorption, where we are totally immersed in it and totally no thinking. And the reflection comes after we emerge from jhanas. And jhanas cannot be achieved when walking, can only be sitting down. No movement at all.
That's another misconception. Yeah, we saw that, isn't it? Actually, you are right if we say second jhana cannot. Because second jhana has got no vitakka, no vichara. If you're walking, you have vitakka, vichara, right? Your intentions to lift your foot, and then the intentions to walk and turn and all that. So, second jhana cannot. A first jhana can. Yeah. So, if that's the case, then why did the Buddha have to go back to do the jhanas? He could just come out of the āruppas and then start to observe things. But he didn't do that. He had to go back to the jhanas, and then from there, he moved. So you don't really need that deep level of absorptions, concentration, to be able to start to observe things that are happening around and to see how they relate to one another. You just need a modicum. In fact, in Jhāna Sutta, the Buddha says, with the first jhana, that can lead you to the destruction of the taints. Second also can, third also can, fourth also can. First āruppa also can, second āruppa also can, third āruppa also can. But he himself didn't do that. Okay?
How do we know that we are in the first jhana?
Yeah, first jhana. Yeah, when all the factors are there. There's initial thought, there's sustained thought, there's rapture, there's comfort or happiness, and then your mind is composed and it's not distracted by what's happening around you. You see, because in the jhana, you're still conscious of what's happening in the senses, but you're not distracted by them. That is it. Okay?